always, watched it virtually, but never got the chance to come in person. And I actually took the chance and applied to speak here. And I was invited to be part of the panel discussion today. So it was really amazing to actually come here to experience all of this.
I think GitHub Universe does have this very casual feel to it, and presenting on the main stage, there's definitely this I'm just talking to developers about this cool thing that I get to work on every day. It's a very different conference feeling than a lot of other places I've presented.
It's a super welcoming conference and really has a community feel to it, which is amazing.
I'm very grateful for having the opportunity to actually speak here at GitHub Universe. So having went through the keynotes, it was an exciting keynote. And I also delivered my session, so I'm looking forward to exploring what the new sessions are going to deliver and what things I can learn.
As a speakers, we are really impressed by the coaching, and the content. The whole organization.
I've spoken at many conferences at this point, and most of them are more corporate-driven and quite a bit larger and quite a bit just louder, frankly. But here, I've made friends with many people. Everyone feels approachable, and I feel approachable too, and I've really enjoyed that experience so far.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kara Souls, and I work at GitHub. This May, like every year, we're celebrating Maintainer Month, a time to reflect on the crucial work that open source maintainers do to keep the entire software ecosystem running and make streams like this even possible. When I heard that the Open Technology Fund was running a FOSS Sustainability Fund, I knew that we had to do a stream with them for Maintainer Month. Money for software maintenance, not just for new features, is few and far between. And it's a model that I really want to see more of. So listen in for a conversation on what that model looks like, open source sustainability in general, public policy, and how to apply specifically for this fund. If you have any questions, throw them in the chat. And I'm thrilled to welcome Felix, Laura, and Susan to the stream. So Felix, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Felix Reda. I'm the new Director of Developer Policy at GitHub. I'm a former politician in the European Union and have been working on open source funding with an EU focus for many years. And yeah, the Open Technology Fund has always been a huge inspiration. So super happy to be part of this conversation.
Laura, do you want to do a quick intro?
Awesome. Thanks, Kara. Thanks for having us today. I'm Laura Cunningham. I'm the president of the Open Technology Fund. I've been with OTF since 2019, and similar to Felix prior to that, I was at the US State Department leading their internet freedom programs and have worn a couple different hats in this community for about the last decade.
And Susan.
Hi, everyone. I am Susan. I'm a program manager at the Open Technology Fund. I'm helping co-lead the new FOSS Sustainability Fund. And prior to this, I was at the design and research organization Superbloom, where I was doing open source sustainability research.
Lovely. Well, I'll pass things off to Felix.
Great. Thanks a lot, Kara. So I want to start with Laura and learning from you a little bit about this new fund. So the Open Technology Fund is probably known to many people for its engagement in supporting anti-censorship, privacy, human rights all over the world. what was the idea behind now starting this FOSS Sustainability Fund?
Yeah, thanks, Felix. So I will maybe take a step back and just kind of reiterate what OTF is all about, because well, you know us, I realize we're not exactly a household name. So as you said, kind of the mission of OTF is to support internet freedom globally. We do that by providing funding and support to open source internet freedom technologies. So specifically, like you said, anti-censorship and privacy preserving tools. But really kind of that open source ethos has been core to OTF since our inception over a decade ago. And so finding ways to really intentionally support that has been important and really critical to our work. In terms of your question, kind of like, how did we come to this fund and what are our goals here? I wish that we could take a bunch of credit for it because I think it's an amazing idea. But I think the reality is that this has really came from the community of developers and activists and human rights defenders that we work with all over the world. We have heard consistently for the last several years that this has really been a gap in the funding space, and that there is a really critical need for more support around open source sustainability and maintenance. And so like hearing that over and over again really made it clear to us that this was a place that OTF needed to step in. I will say, I think there are a couple of other factors just in terms of how our field and community have evolved that got us to this place that I think are important to reflect on. When OTF started investing in open source technologies a decade ago, we were doing and supporting naturally a lot of development work. We were supporting the creation of many new kind of solutions and technologies. But the reality is that our field, our technologies have matured a lot over the last decade. And in recognition of that, we also need to update how we are supporting those types of technologies. It can't just be about development. As our field has grown, as our projects and our partners and our technologies have matured, we have to think critically about how we can best meet them where they are in terms of their kind of support needs and their resource needs. And so the FOSS Fund was a big part of that kind of process of reevaluating what those needs are today and the kind of value add that OTF can bring there. And lastly, on that point, I will just say, I think to be perfectly honest, that OTF also fell into a little bit of an open source trap that I see a lot of other funders fall into. And so want to kind of highlight particularly. I think there are a couple of things or assumptions that are made about open source technology. Maintenance. One is that development is cooler or more important or flashier, and that's where resources should go. And I see, and we are, like I said, guilty of this as well. I see a lot of funders prioritizing development over maintenance in this space. I also think there's kind of an interesting myth in the donor space that open source technologies are sustainable in and of themselves. Like they are inherently sustainable because of how they work and how they are supported. And I really think we need to get beyond that and beyond kind of relying on unpaid labor and unpaid efforts to support what is really critical infrastructure and starting to value the maintenance and the critical support for these technologies in and of themselves. And so I think all of those factors kind of came together for us, this demand from the community, the recognition that we needed to mature and kind of reflect on the support mechanisms that we had in place, and also realizing and kind of challenging some of these myths around open source that really pushed us to develop a fund that really intentionally supports maintenance and sustainability around open source, to want to name that explicitly and to resource it explicitly because it is a critical part of the field that we support, and we need to be intentional about how we're doing that.
Yeah, I'm so struck by how similar sort of the discussions and the learning curve have been compared to some of the funds that I worked on. So like 10 years ago when I started or proposed my first kind of FOSS funding scheme, it was a bug bounty, and it kind of had a lot of the same issues, okay, so people get rewarded for finding bugs, but not necessarily for fixing them. And honestly, it wasn't even because we thought that was the best way to do it, but because it was a government fund and there were just public procurement, very boring reasons behind it why this particular scheme was easier to implement than others. And so one thing that I find really interesting about the FOSS Sustainability Fund is that the OTF, also as a kind of public sector initiative, is now partnering with GitHub and other countries, so private sector sponsors. And I would be curious to hear more about like what the advantages of that approach were and what led you to take this step to kind of look beyond public sector funding in this field.
Yeah, so as you said, Felix, the FOSS Sustainability Fund is actually supported by a variety of donors, and I'll want to give a quick thank you and a shout out for the folks who have like acknowledged the importance of this work and invested in this. So first and foremost to GitHub for supporting this fund, as well as Omidyar, Okta for Good, Schmidt Futures Plain Text Group. That's a whole bunch of words. And then, like you said, we have matched those private funds with some of our federal US government funding as well. And I think that combination and that mix of funds has been really, really important for this initiative in particular for two reasons. One, and I think we'll talk about this a little bit more, it's hard to get donors to invest in maintenance and sustainability. So when it became clear that there were a couple of donors willing to kind of take this step and invest in this space, that excitement snowballed a little bit. And so that was really exciting for us. Having a variety of donors not only kind of, I think, proved to them how important this is, but it also allowed us to make the case with our federal funds that this is a priority, that this is acknowledged in many different spaces as really needing support. And so it made it easier to kind of justify and really intentionally set aside resources for. The other huge benefit about being able to have both private and federal funds for this initiative in particular is that it just gives us a lot more flexibility in terms of how we fund. So Felix, you hit the nail on the head. The limitations that come with government funding are real. And with something like the FOSS Sustainability Fund in particular, where we want to be creative and flexible to kind of really meet the needs of the projects that we're working with, having a variety of resources that we can use to fund different aspects of these projects is really critical for us to kind of create that flexibility and develop projects that are really right for the needs of these technologies. So that's been a huge benefit of this fund. And I hope will, as I said, kind of continue to encourage more donors to invest in this space and understand really the importance of this work.
Yeah, I think it's much appreciated. And I want to bring in Susan in a minute, because I'm sure people will be curious about how they can apply for this fund and all the practicalities involved in that. But kind of maybe to close things off on the big picture kind of questions. I mean, obviously, it's kind of easy to show when there has been insufficient maintenance funding. If there's a big catastrophe, also in like other types of public infrastructure, if a bridge collapses, everybody knows, oh, we didn't invest enough. But how do you actually measure success and also communicate to companies, to public decision makers, that this kind of work is really crucial? And what does success look like for the FOSS Sustainability Fund?
Yeah, I think this is probably one of the biggest challenges when we were setting up the fund. It was so clear that there was a need here. It was so clear about the activities that our projects really wanted supported and needed supported. But the kind of impact model is hard to describe. You're right. No one gets excited when a bridge doesn't collapse. And that's kind of the goal of this fund. So I think, really practically, there are a couple of ways that the fund is set up to make sure we're able to kind of measure impact. So we work with each one of the projects to have kind of a clear deliverable schedule, so we understand kind of exactly what they're working on and their overall kind of theory of change of how that is going to ultimately help with their long-term sustainability or maintenance. The other thing I will say is that we have also tried to set up the fund, given the limited resources we have, to prioritize technologies and tools that are really foundational to other elements of the internet freedom community. So looking at supporting technologies that other tools depend on. So we make sure that our investments are having kind of as big of a ripple effect across the broader tech sector, across the internet freedom community as possible. So those are kind of the practical mechanisms that we have in place. But I will also say, honestly, and maybe this isn't the right thing to say, but this is a real learning experience for us. And it is intended to be so. One of the things that we are doing with the FOSS Sustainability Fund is having our projects work really closely with our learning lab, which is the way we kind of do learning and monitoring evaluation at OTF. But working really closely with the learning lab to document kind of what the projects are doing, what's working, what isn't, so that not only we can learn from that going forward, but also with the intention of making that information public so other tools and the community can learn as well. The hope there obviously is that if we're all learning together, we can make these types of investments more impactful and make them stretch further. And I also hope it kind of lowers the barriers to entry for other donors in this space who might have that question, Felix, about impact and what that looks like. And being able to document and share that learning, I hope, is a way to encourage other folks and maybe make this feel a little bit less scary in terms of a really critical area to invest.
Yeah, and of course, in that context, it's kind of interesting to know how much the OTF and the sponsors are already putting in the bucket. So can you say something about like the size of this fund and also kind of how much an individual project can receive? That's a question that has come up in the chat.
Yeah, I can give kind of an overview, but then I might pitch to Susan for some examples of the projects from our pilot round. So right now we have $1.5 million annually for the FOSS Sustainability Fund, which is a small drop in the bucket compared to the demand that we see here. And we're supporting a handful of projects, each at kind of, like I said, a different funding amount, which is specific to kind of their needs and the deliverables that they've put together. We're also funding our projects right now on a 2-year cycle, which we hope helps to kind of establish more kind of longer term maintenance and sustainability initiatives. We recognize there needs to be kind of a good trajectory here for folks to be able to be successful with these types of longer term initiatives. And we're trying to match our funding to that to a certain extent. But Susan, I'll pitch over to you on kind of some examples and of kind of funding amounts and the types of projects that are falling in that pilot round right now.
Sure thing. Yeah, I don't know. I'll have to pull up maybe exact numbers, but a great project that I always love to highlight because it really shows that outsized impact that a small project can have on security in the broader FOSS ecosystem is the developing encrypted client hello for OpenSSL, i.e. DEFO project. So this project is part of our pilot round, and it's updating the critical OpenSSL library, which is how internet servers certify most HTTPS websites today. So there was a long-standing privacy link that meant sensors and would-be attackers could eavesdrop on servers' web traffic. So this DEFO project is promoting adoption of this ECH, encrypted client hello fix. So we are funding the often forgotten about, underfunded tasks of code maintenance, security analysis, implementations, and documentation of this privacy enhancing protocol. And I want to say that one is for 150 for 1 year, so that would be about 300,000 over 2 years. But each project ranges. We also are supporting Tails, which is a portable operating system that is very important. Doing very important work on anti-censorship and anti-surveillance. It's based on the Tor network, and it's a very secure option for those most at risk of government surveillance and censorship. We're supporting them. also with some technical day-to-day maintenance and upgrades, but as well as operational tasks such as project management and accounting support, simplifying contributor workflows, adding fundraising capacity, and things like that. So really, each project is, like Laura mentioned, the amounts are very specific to what activities they're pursuing. We're funding both the technical and social and operational elements of sustainability. But yes, exactly. It ranges from 150 to 400,000 for 24 months.
That's great. I think I'll follow up right there with you, Susan, because it has come up now a couple of times in the conversation, sort of the OTF's legacy in supporting fundamental rights across the world, anti-censorship technologies. And for people who are listening who may be wondering, is this the fund I should be applying for with my project? This might be something that's perceived sort of as a barrier, like do I have to show how my particular open source projects contributes to the protection of fundamental rights, internet freedom, and so on? So could you explain a little bit like what people will have to put in the application to kind of show that their project is relevant for this particular fund, or which projects perhaps might want to go for a different fund in this field?
Sure thing. Thank you so much, Felix. That's a great question. So exactly as you said, our mission overall is to advance internet freedom in repressive environments. So in some sense, all projects we support must advance that aim. Our application process walks projects through what's required to apply. Applicants should feel comfortable answering those questions in the form. We do always look for emphasis on how the technology will benefit end users in repressive information contexts. However, we understand that many FOSS projects can be several steps removed from those end users. So for examples, in cases of protocols and libraries and standards or other components that make up the building blocks of other technologies, we might look for a demonstration of the technology, of the privacy and security tools or apps that rely on those components that are applying for funding is a helpful use of impact. So one thing I'll highlight is that the application process is in 2 phases. So it starts with a lighter weight concept note where projects are asked to describe their project and their sustainability needs, as well as obviously who they intend to impact. But the benefit of having it in 2 phases is that if we feel that it is promising to move to the second phase, we will provide feedback and guidance and how best to approach the final proposal phase of the application process. So anyone who's interested in applying and feels like they might be a fit, we encourage they apply. And since it's a 2-phase process, there's opportunity for feedback. And we also are more than happy to talk with anyone via email to answer more specific questions. But essentially, yes, I mean, obviously our goal is to support human rights and promote internet freedom. But in the FOSS context, there are many, many projects that have touch points in that. And there's many, many ways to make that case.
Mm-hmm. So if I understand this correctly, and the question has also come up in the chat, so it's helpful if you can show, even if your technology is very sort of basic and is used in all kinds of different contexts, it's useful to be able to show a connection to privacy, but it doesn't have to be a privacy tool. Is that right?
If privacy tools rely on your technology to function, then you are critical for internet freedom. So I think, a case, as long as that case can be made that you are relied on, which obviously many FOSS tools are in the privacy and security space for many different reasons, then yes, that would qualify.
Okay, great. I mean, I feel like there's a renewed sense of attention to software supply chain, and this has sort of been an ebb and flow over the years. I remember 10 years ago, it was Heartbleed, then a couple of years ago Log4j, and now a bit more recently XZ, I think, has really raised public attention to the issues around software supply chain and also the sustainability of these basic technologies that we all rely on. And I would be very interested to hear both of your perspectives on XZ. So perhaps from Laura, more how it has changed the conversation. Like, I don't know, has attention or interest in the FOSS Sustainability Fund increased as a consequence of that? And also perhaps to Susan, because a big conversation point following XZ has not just been monetary funding for open source basic technologies, but also sort of the human factor. How do we support single maintainers who may not have started out with the intention of building a project that becomes central to the whole world, that all kinds of people and projects rely on, and might find themselves somewhat trapped in that situation? And how can the FOSS Sustainability Fund help in such situations? I don't know, Laura, do you want to take it first, and then we can circle around that topic a bit?
Yeah, Felix, I think you're exactly right. And we've all seen the same pattern, when it was Heartbleed and then Log4j, now XZ. These all continue to kind of pique interest, I think. And there tends to be a flurry around open source security and sustainability around these types of events. I think it's unfortunate that, to use your earlier analogy, we have to wait for, a bridge to collapse for people to be interested and to understand the value of this work. So yes, we've gotten more interest in the fund coming out of the XZ situation. But I think more importantly for us, this fund is not going anywhere at OTF. This is not because of that. It's not because of Log4j. It's because it's a critical need for our community and our field and the way that we are thinking about supporting this work long term. So while, yes, there's maybe a little bit more interest right now, I also want to say, like, this is a critical part of how OTF sees funding this space going forward. And it's not just in reaction to those issues.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's really important to highlight. And indeed, I think the pilot round has started a lot earlier than the XZ revelations, right?
Correct. Yeah, we launched that actually last January. So it's a good indication of why this is important, but it is not the reason for it to exist.
Okay, so let's look a little bit beyond sort of the pure monetary support. And yes, Susan, what are your reflections on kind of what kind of support is it that open source maintainers need, and what role can the OTF and the FOSS Sustainability Fund play in that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'll just reiterate with what Laura just said. Like, time and again, we see how many components of the secure internet relies on one or two overworked maintainers. So, but without proper technical maintenance, but as well healthy and vibrant communities to support this maintenance, which I feel like sometimes we say we need money for the coding, but that doesn't encompass the full breadth of what is involved in maintenance day to day. These technologies are really in danger of becoming defective. So we shaped the fund with input from the community around a very holistic perspective of sustainability, considering both the technical and human elements necessary for project success. So in our review process, we're looking for applications that balance technical, operational, and community objectives. So examples of investing in human infrastructure in addition to the technical are things like supporting governance planning, in-person meetups of contributors, diversity initiatives, growing contributor bases, investing in community managers, administrating community mailing lists, establishing user feedback loops, and bolstering public communications. These just are some of the examples of like non-code work that we support, that I think in examples like the the XZ News shows, what that tool was lacking was really like a healthy community of support. And so that's a huge component of what we're looking to invest in through this fund. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of reflecting on how a few years ago there was sort of an oversupply of hackathons and an over-reliance on hackathons, and it was sort of, I think the expectation was that hackathons would lead to these amazing technological innovations, and then we did way too many of them, and they never really delivered what they promised. Then the pandemic happened, and I feel now maybe the pendulum has swung a little bit the other direction, that there are not enough opportunities for maintainers or people active in the open source community as developers to actually meet in person and form these personal relationships of trust. And yeah, I think it's also something that GitHub is hoping to facilitate, and I'm seeing other organizations in the field just putting on conferences where people can meet. And I think that's, yeah, building these personal relationships is something that every project at the end of the day needs to be healthy, and also perhaps, well, not perhaps, definitely leads also to better communication within project. Like if everything is text-based and people don't actually have an opportunity to get to know each other on a personal level, that can lead to all kinds of conflict. So maybe it's something we should also be paying more attention to. There was also a question in the chat about long-term sustainability. So you mentioned that the maximum funding period is 2 years, right? So what happens after that?
Sure. Yeah. So for the application round, that would be for 2-year funding. However, what we're looking for is to really support projects building long-term sustainability. And so that includes activities like funding their strategic planning, funding things like I mentioned, developer meetups with an intentionality behind them to like build structure for like community facilitation moving forward, things like fundraising capacity, and even on the technical side, implementing things like testing infrastructure, code optimization. All of these things impact long-term sustainability that hopefully will improve. We'll continue to support the project beyond the 2-year term of funding. Obviously, like we've mentioned, it is limited funds, and we want to be sure that we're able to support a variety of projects in the ecosystem. So we wouldn't commit, obviously, to funding a single project for its lifetime, but we do look for projects that are thinking about ways that this funding can go towards investing in their long-term sustainability. So obviously there will always be the need for future funding, and we hope to, through our OTF Talk mailing list and other things like that, we try and foster a community of funded projects, including past funded projects, sharing news with each other, sharing funding opportunities with each other, and things like that. So there's lots of ways we try and support projects with future funding as well. But as far as like what we invest in this fund, we're looking for long-term sustainability investments.
That's great. And Laura, you want to come in on this?
I was just going to give a little shout out, Felix, just to say, while we're talking about the FOSS Sustainability Fund specifically today, I did want to highlight that this isn't the only way that OTF supports open source technologies. As Susan has alluded to, we have a number of different funds, and we also have resource labs that provide in-kind services to open source technology projects. So just to say, if, I think a couple of people have commented on kind of the funding range. If that's not the right fit for you, I would really encourage you to look at things like our Internet Freedom Fund, for example. Felix, you brought up convenings, which is something OTF actually supports, and I think is really critical in terms of building trust in the open source and internet freedom community. That's another thing we fund through the Internet Freedom Fund. So, this is really our way of trying to intentionally speak to the maintenance and sustainability needs in the community. But we have a number of different support mechanisms that I'd encourage folks to check out as well if this one doesn't quite meet your needs.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point to raise, that ideally we want to have an ecosystem of lots of different funds, and there's some movement in this direction. So in Germany, where I live, we recently established a sovereign tech fund as a public funding instrument, and it was actually to some extent also inspired by the OTF. And so I hope that once again the FOSS Sustainability Fund can maybe inspire other countries around the world, or also other actors in the private sector, to set up these kinds of funding mechanism. And one thing that we were often asked in the German context was like, oh, do I need to have a German tax ID, or do I need to be a German company or association to apply for this fund? And I assume you get the same questions regarding the US. So do people need to have like US Social Security ID or be a US entity of some sort? What if I'm just a loose group of friends who are spread over 3 continents who don't have an NGO or a company or a foundation? Can they still apply to this fund? Susan, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure, definitely. So it's a pretty easy answer, which is applicants can be based, or our applicants are based all around the world, and are different shapes and sizes, from individuals to organizations, small organizations, large organizations. All are welcome to apply. We do have some like sanctions restrictions, which are listed in country-specific, which are listed in our application page. You can go and see more details on that. But the short and easy answer is we welcome global applicants. And when it comes to the individual versus organization application process, we will review applications, and then once a project is approved, we'll work on a one-on-one case-by-case basis what contracting will look like in a specific instance. But we're very flexible.
I think that's helpful. And if people kind of need help with figuring out something like a fiscal sponsor, is this also something that the OTF helps with, or that you can write into your application? Like, or does it already have to be in place at the point when you apply?
Oh, go ahead, Laura. Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, not to be wishy-washy, but it's always case by case. I think it should not be a restriction for application. If someone's worried about that, it can be a conversation we have during the review process and after approval. And we will support them with that process to the extent we can. We certainly can't like manage that for them or anything like that. But it should not be a restriction to the application process.
Okay, so let's talk about what happens if somebody makes an application and is actually successful. Yay. What happens then? Like, do they just get a bunch of money to their bank account and then can they do whatever they want? Or who decides how the funding is then actually spent, and which needs of the project are prioritized, and so on?
Sure. So as part of the application process, we ask for a roadmap and a budget. So it's actually not just the idea, it's like the project itself that's funded. It is specific activities that are proposed. So that is a project will be asked to talk about their priorities, how they're going to approach it, and on what timeline. And so upon funding approval, that would kick off that process. So typically we do deliverables based. So a project would complete activities and then get paid. But there are many, many ways that can look like, and it is really case by case. But it isn't it isn't like a grant structure where there would be just like a lump sum in a bank account. We work closely with projects on their throughout their roadmap delivery process, and they get funded along the way.
Okay, and when this kind of roadmap is put in place, I assume all of the funding sort of has to be spent during the 2 years, or are there like different lengths for how long the funding or the deliverable period would actually be? Like, can you do something really ambitious that would be, I don't know, 5 years long or something, but only get paid in the 2 years, or does everything actually have to be finished by the end of the funding period?
I guess with trying to think of a good example of what that might look like, but in an example, like let's say there's a big infrastructure overhaul or something, and could be broken down into components, for instance. So like I could imagine a project proposing, okay, actually, we will be paid for 2 works towards this end goal, or sorry, 2 years toward this end goal. And these are the milestones along the way that we will hit to get there. Like that's a potential scenario. But yeah, I mean, so it is very flexible, and we work with the projects after project approval to really define what those milestones will be, so that cash flow makes sense for the project, and that milestones are really achievable and not overstretching them or in any way. So it is really case by case, but there's certainly scenarios where that might make sense if a case can be made about impact long term and manageable milestones along the way. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, totally. And another thing that came up also regarding sort of the conditions on the funding. So when I shared the call for applications on Mastodon, there were quite a few questions about the intellectual property policy. So could you explain that, kind of what applicants have to expect regarding copyright? I know it's a very sensitive topic for a lot of open source projects, like what kind of licenses are applied to the code and so on.
Yeah, of course. No, this is a great question, and I completely see how this would be confusing as it's worded in a kind of legalese sort of way. But just to be clear, it does not stand in the way of existing open source licenses. Our only requirement is that the projects we fund are open source. We fund projects with many different types of licenses. The thing that I guess what you're referring to as far as the work product produced under the contract being OTF's property, what that is referring to is reporting on the deliverables. So like I mentioned before, if a project hits a certain milestone and they get paid, what they report on to get paid is what we own, i.e. like a brief narrative report is an example. So that probably could use some clarification in that section, but no, we do not require specific licenses, and we do not own the software that's produced.
Okay, great. I think that's really clear. And there's also a follow-up question on that in the chat. What about who is managing the project? So can a for-profit company that is managing an open source project apply for this fund, or is it limited to sort of NGOs, individuals, nonprofits?
We receive applications from all types of entities, so that shouldn't be a limiting factor either.
Okay, that's great to know. I think especially for smaller projects, single maintainers, and so on, there is a huge barrier to even putting in the time and investment to even writing an application, especially if only a small number of projects end up getting chosen. I assume there will be a lot more applications than the FOSS Sustainability Fund can fund in the end. So taking into account how high the workload of maintainers already is, like what can you tell people on why they should put in that investment of time and effort to write an application?
Sure, thank you. That's a really real consideration of ours. So we aim to make the application process as accessible as possible. That being said, of course, it does always take some time to apply to things. As I mentioned before, the process is in 2 stages. So the first part is a lightweight concept note, and only so many will make it to the proposal stage. So we don't ask that projects submit a lengthier roadmap, a comprehensive budget in these things until we know that they are at the quite competitive stage of the proposal process. So we also provide feedback in that during that first review part. So we'll, if a project does not move forward, we'll provide feedback, which hopefully can help them reapply in the future or direct them in to different funds, or if they do get invited to the full proposal phase, we will be very specific about what we're looking for so that they can devote their time to the specific things that is needed for a successful proposal. So that is kind of what the idea behind the two-phase process is, that we can, rather than just have kind of like a blank slate, throw it all on the wall, like 10-page proposal, will it stick kind of thing. We try and make sure that applicants are guided through the process so that they are most effective with their time as far as what we're asking for. Another thing I'll mention is that our proposal really emphasizes the roadmap, which means it is ideally what will be the project management guidepost over the course of a project. So a lot of projects use the proposal as their tool, as their like project management like tool that they have over the course of the funding period. So also we try and make it a very practical application and not too theoretical.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, that sometimes, I mean, certainly writing the first application is probably the biggest amount of work. And even if you don't succeed the first time, having already put things to paper in that way really sets you up very well also for future applications. And even if one fund is not exactly the right fit, there might be other funds that can pick up some things. So for example, Laura, you talked earlier about the fact that everybody loves to fund innovation, and funding maintenance is a lot harder. But there's also kind of perhaps the flip side of that coming up in the chat. Do you have to be an established project to apply for this particular fund? I mean, how long do you have to exist for something to qualify as sort of maintenance and sustainability? So if you have a new project that is sort of relevant for the field of anti-censorship, privacy technology, it ticks all the boxes, but it's not established yet, would this be the right fund to go for?
I'm so glad this question was asked because the answer is no. So the FOSS Sustainability Fund is looking to support software that has been released for at least 3 years, and that also has at least 4 updates a year. So an active code base, and if it's an app or tool, active user base. We're really looking to sustain strong, like existing projects that are in it for the long haul. That being said, we have our flagship fund, the Internet Freedom Fund, which supports new projects all the time. So I would just direct folks that way. If it is a anti-censorship, anti-surveillance, privacy-preserving tool, app, standard, protocol, library, go check out that fund, because we invest in new and innovative ideas all the time through that fund. But for the FOSS Fund, yeah, at least 3 years is what we're looking for as the target.
Yeah, really want to highlight that point. There are probably a lot more funding opportunities for new projects where you can really show, okay, this thing doesn't exist yet or is in its infancy, and I want to build a prototype. I want to get this off the ground. At least with my experience also sort of with public sector funding instruments, there are a lot of innovation funds out there, not so many maintenance funds. So I really appreciate also you being active in this area. We are almost at the hour, so I'm also looking at the chat if there are new topics coming up that we haven't covered yet. Yeah, there's a question about sort of the number of applications you receive. I mean, obviously, this is a new fund, so it's the first funding round from the FOSS Sustainability Fund, but perhaps you can talk a little bit from experience. What is sort of the ratio of need in this space versus the funding available? And perhaps also if there are people watching from philanthropy or other companies, like this is an opportunity also to pitch to become more active in this field, so that many more FOSS sustainability funds hopefully will spring up. I don't know who of you is better placed to talk about that, sort of from your experience at the OTF?
Want me to take it, Susan?
Yeah, maybe your longer term perspective might be.
Yeah, so as you said, Felix, so this is our first round of the FOSS Sustainability Fund. We did the pilot round with those 6 projects last year, and this is the first application process. So we will get back to you on the answer to that question in the next month or two. I can say, in general, just given funding constraints and the incredible demand for this work, we usually fund less than 10% of the applications we receive. I am always cautious about saying that because I don't want that to deter people from applying. What that really demonstrates to me is that there's just an incredible demand for this work and a credible need for this funding. The other thing I will say that I hope is a little bit more encouraging along those lines to people who are thinking about funding is we frequently see projects that apply to us a first time around and are unsuccessful, come back, take feedback on board and reapply and are successful. And part of the way that we kind of why we invest so much in feedback, like Susan said, and that kind of multi-stage review process is because we want to set folks up for success on a second or third time around. So unfortunately, the resource constraints just mean that it's usually less than 10%, but we really do try and work with projects who have the potential to get them into a successful round.
Yeah, I really want to echo that even if it might seem like a big task, just kind of open the application form, and especially this first application phase is really quite slim. So it doesn't hurt perhaps to put in an imperfect application because that's also a learning process. Yeah, we're almost at the hour, so I would like to look to the future a bit. So this fund is going to take applications until May 17, right? So how quickly can people then expect next steps? So kind of how quickly are you hoping to make decisions on applications? I'll perhaps ask that to Susan, and then when would funding actually start? And maybe for Laura, also kind of looking forward, like what are you hoping to be the results of this fund, maybe like 2-3 years down the line? I'll start with Susan on the more practical, kind of what happens from here on out.
Sure. Yes, thank you. So yeah, the application deadline is May 17th, so that is coming up. After that's the concept note review phase. We hope by the end of June we will have submitted to applicants approvals to move forward to proposal stage or the dismissals. And then what that looks like at the end of June then is that if you're invited to a proposal stage, you will be given a month or so to submit a full proposal. And then that review process typically takes a couple months. If you are successful in that phase, you move on to our advisory council review, which is another several weeks. And we expect to fund successful applicants, get those projects kicked off in mid-fall. So.
Fantastic. So Laura, what's your kind of view of where will we be 2-3 years down the line?
My dream, my vision for this. I mean, obviously, we're hoping to have more resources to support this work. So I think I will say 2 things. One, I'm hoping that there's more resources, and I hope that those resources continue to be diverse. We don't want to get into a situation where, FOSS or kind of this sustainability work is only being supported by one donor. I want to continue to see the group of funders who are supporting this work really expand, as well as the resources increase. And then, like I said at the very beginning, I also really hope that this is a learning opportunity. I hope that over the next couple of years, we learn from the projects who are doing this work. We have better models around maintenance and sustainability so that this can be go beyond just resources for these tools, but we can think more comprehensively around what that support could look like going forward and potentially build out other mechanisms to be able to support these kinds of projects. So I'm really excited about what that learning looks like, in addition to, I hope, increasing support for this really critical work.
Fantastic. Yeah, I hope so too. GitHub is certainly really excited to be part of this effort from the start, and hopefully many others will follow suit. So thanks a lot. I'll hand it back to Kara for final remarks and summary. And yeah, thanks for the great participation also from the comments.
Thank you so much for doing this, Felix. Thank you, Susan and Laura, for joining us from the Open Technology Fund. We are huge fans of, as you said, diverse ways to support software maintenance and software development at GitHub. It's what we're all about. And so we're obviously, therefore, really big fans of the OTF, and doing this is an absolute delight. I had to take myself off the video because I was nodding so hard that it was like very distracting. It was like, yes, get it. So thank you for coming and chatting to everyone. We've shared a bunch of resources on it, but as Laura and Susan said, if you have questions for the OTF, just reach out, just chat with them. They're there. And then for Maintainer Month, we've got a lot more activities coming up. You can check it out, maintainermonth.github.com. You can put your own stuff that's happening this month. Take a moment to think about someone whose project you really depend on and thank them. Give them some money on sponsors. Give them a shout out. If you're working at a company that can support open source that you rely on, figure out how you can do that and how people want to be supported. I mean, this is a sticky note to ask yourself what you can do to help keep this ecosystem going, because there's a lot of people doing a ton of very thankless and often unfunded work out there. So thank you, Laura, and thank you, Susan, for your work to make that a little bit more funded. And with that, we'll see you all soon.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.